3 minutes after 10, a very good morning to you. Bad for business. I'm good for business, bad for the soul. Hang on a sec. 3 minutes after 10, a very good morning to you. 11th word on the programme this morning. The 11th word I said was a mistake. That's got to be a new record, hasn't it? It's what people say to me. How's things? How are you? I had a lovely party last night at the Royal Something of the Arts with my publishers. All sorts of fascinating and important people were there. And people say, how are you? How's tricks? And for the last 6 or 7 years, I've always said, it's all very good for business, very bad for the soul. British politics, great for business, bad for the soul. And few things fit that description better than Boris Johnson, our soon-to-be ex-Prime Minister. Great for business, amazing for business, bad for the soul. He's been good for business since, time immemorial, since I was in short trousers, practically, but very, very bad for the soul. And that's quite a selfish analysis, of course, of Boris Johnson, but it's something that I say when people ask me how I am. Of course, the real deal is that Boris Johnson has been incredibly good for business in the same way that Donald Trump was incredibly good for business. I'm talking largely about journalism, and particularly journalism that leans towards commentary and analysis rather than mere reportage. Very, very good for business. Appalling for the country. Great for business, bad for Britain. Have you seen what the pound is doing this morning? Have you seen that? You've seen the IMF warnings about our energy crisis being worse than anywhere else in Europe. You've seen the fact that you can't even take the kids to Disneyland Paris anymore on a direct train because of the new checks that are coming in later this year. All of this, arguably a legacy of Boris Johnson's premiership. But I am interested today, genuinely, in what you're going to remember him for. What you're going to remember his premiership for. Allies and client journalists already making noises about possible comebacks. And pay attention to this. You would think, wouldn't you, that being hounded out of office by your closest colleagues after being found to have broken the law in the actual seat of government, in the actual heart of our democracy, you'd think that would be the end of anybody's career. But Boris Johnson has done countless things in the course of his life that would have been the end of anybody else's career. From his sexual incontinence, his appalling treatment of wives and mistresses, right through, and children, of course, one of whom he went to court to seek to sort of deny the existence of. Absolutely catastrophic moral compass, non-existent moral compass, any other career. Well, because of shame, you see. So shame with any other politician would have played a part and led them to defenestrate themselves. But to be completely without shame. And this is where I was a bit slow on the uptake, a bit slow on the obvious comparison with Donald Trump. I didn't want to believe it. Because, do you know what? I didn't want to believe it because of patriotism. I didn't want to believe that we here could have ended up putting into power someone as depraved, albeit in a slightly different way, as Donald Trump. But what the two men have in common is a complete absence of shame, an inability to feel shame, an inability to feel ashamed, an inability to be embarrassed, an absolutely Teflon approach to the standards and the requirements of civilization by which the rest of us abide. And already, of course, you're hearing echoes of that infamous letter from his headmaster at Eton describing precisely that personality type. He honestly seems to think that he should be exempt from the standards that the rest of us have to observe. So that, I put it like that, and it's going to sound a bit silly to suggest that didn't necessarily have to lead to disaster. But that didn't necessarily have to lead to disaster. In some ways, having a politician devoid of normal conscience, devoid of shame, lacking any capacity for embarrassment or self-reflection, you could imagine circumstances in which it could almost be a positive if you needed to make swift decisions. But of course, he couldn't do that either. He never makes any decision until the last possible moment, when the decision is essentially made for him. You saw it with lockdowns. So many people died before he called the lockdowns. He couldn't even be bothered to go to the Cobra meetings, the first 5 Cobra meetings at the beginning of the outbreak. And when it becomes inarguable that he must do something, he does it and then claims that he got all the big calls right. He hasn't made a single call in the whole history of his prime ministerial career. Not a single call. Everything he's ever done has been as a consequence of opportunism or necessity. I don't think he's made a single decision since he became prime. I don't think he's made a single decision since puberty that could be put down to genuine integrity or even ideology. What's best for me? What's best for me? And the third criteria upon which Boris Johnson makes decisions, what's best for me? So even when he's done things he didn't really want to do, like introduce policies that would stop the bodies from piling high. He's done so because to not do it would have been worse for him than to do it. So the only brake upon his selfishness is his self-interest. That's astonishing when you think about it. But again, quick glance across the Atlantic and there is Donald Trump doing exactly the same thing. The only brake upon the selfishness is self-interest. When doing the thing I don't want to do will actually be more in my self-interest than doing the thing I do want to do. Right, I think you should write that one down, Keith, actually. The only brake upon his selfishness is self-interest. And you see it with Trump, who, of course, is still lying through his teeth about the election result and, of course, about the top-secret documents that he stole from the American people, that he stole from the White House and has now been busted for on a scale that at any other point in history, with any other politician, any other American president, we would all be sitting here now going, oh my days! We'd be spluttering with incomprehension and incredulity, not just going, oh look, something else absolutely awful and unprecedented being done by somebody who is absolutely awful and unprecedented. It's incredible, and we have our equivalent here in Britain. We have people who are still persuaded that Johnson has been anything other than a cataclysmic catastrophe for this country, in the same way that there are millions of people in America persuaded that Donald Trump actually won the last election and would once again make a brilliant president. I resisted the parallels for ages. But you can't anymore. In fact, as one text has already pointed out, that double article, the 2 columns he wrote about Brexit, are the absolute essence of that description of him being a man who's the only brake upon his selfishness is self-interest. You know, what's best for me? It's incredible. 10 minutes after 10 is the time. And I've also noticed that apart from some sort of very strange people who don't think he's really done anything wrong and he's been badly judged, they can't name anything he's done well except that he got Brexit done, which is a bit like boasting about setting fire to your own house. What did he got? Well, he got the fire done, didn't he? You can't say that all those other ones. People kept trying to stop people setting fire to the house, but Boris managed to set fire to the house. He got it done, didn't he? He got Brexit done. He got the fire done, and then absolute bilge about the vaccine rollout, which was based upon giving Kate Bingham a blank checkbook to write as many checks as she wanted for as many vaccines as she could lay her hands on, and it briefly worked. We were briefly a little bit ahead of the game, but we're not anymore, and we weren't by Christmas. So even that's just nonsense. It's not a lie as such. It's just nonsense. It's meaningless. It's pathetic. It's like a drowning man desperately grasping a lollipop stick in the hope that it might help him stay afloat. How many years has he been Prime Minister for? Not even, about 3, isn't it, give or take? 3 years. He's achieved nothing. He's presided over catastrophes unthought of in modern times. His response to the coronavirus was veered between the non-existent and the psychopathic. It's quite incredible that people still look at him fondly, tug their forelocks, doff their caps and wave their Daily Mail in the sky. Breathtaking. Anyway, that's what I think. I didn't even make a list this morning. I mean, where do you begin? Misleading the Queen, some people, the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. Even now, in his final days, paying off a top lawyer to provide legal advice that they hope might somehow help the Daily Mail's campaign to undermine the Standards Committee investigation into whether Boris Johnson did or didn't do something he's already apologised for. People using courtroom analogies today. What this is like, it's claiming that Labour MPs have already made their minds up. He's already apologised for doing it. I mean, it's a kangaroo court. It's a witch hunt. Nadine Dorries, bless her little cotton socks, claiming it's a Kafkaesque witch hunt. I will bet you every penny I have that Nadine Dorries has not read a word of Kafka in her life. In fact, as a general rule, newspapers using Kafkaesque in a headline have no concept whatsoever of what Kafkaesque means. Kafkaesque, if you wanted to take it in its simplest terms, would probably mean an ordinary citizen who is being broken upon the wheel of government bureaucracy and an oppressive regime. So the idea that a prime minister can be the victim of something Kafkaesque is both ridiculous and ignorant at the same time. Speaking of Nadine Dorries. But what about you? So I haven't done a list. And I'm resisting the urge because I really want to. It's a bit like, I'm going to go full Partridge now. Are you ready? It's a bit like being a jazz musician when you start cataloguing the calumnies and scandals of Boris Johnson's premiership. When you do what I do for a living, it's like you start off with, I don't know, what did we start off with? With the misleading of the Queen and the unlawful proroguing of Parliament, and that's like your sort of bait. That's your. Shall I go all in on this? That's sort of your opening notes. You know, I was at Ronnie Scott's last week, see my friend Curtis Stigers, and when a jazz band gets off on one, when it goes off flying, it's just a thing of beauty, right? And when you're talking about Boris Johnson, it's the same, because you think, oh, I've peaked, and then you remember something else that he's done, something else awful that he's done. You remember hiding in fridges, for example, or you remember the pledge to break the law in a very limited and specific way. Oh, the promise that there'd be no border in the Irish Sea. The barefaced, blatant, endless lies. The wriggling. It's incredible. And when you start doing it, and I'm resisting the urge, because you just heard it there, right? A little toot on my horn there, just to start it off. Reach for that. You remember Owen Paterson. It's incredible how awful he is, how awful he has been. And as with Trump, how many people continue to worship at the altar of his lies and nonsenses. I'm going to put a little apology out. I don't imagine you're going to carry on listening, but a couple of texts coming in. Don't you have anything else to say? Don't you have anything else to talk about? I do feel for you. One of the curses of being a liberal, being a centrist, whatever you want to call it, compassion is a curse. I even feel sorry for Liz Truss today, because one newspaper reports that her own father is so disgusted by her political journey that he can't bring himself even to talk about her. And that, you think, if you're human, if you're not built like Boris Johnson's built, you actually can feel sorry for Liz Truss. And if you're listening to me, and you've spent years listening to me, and here's another one. Here's let me get this. Here's Kevin Skinner. For God's sake, leave it, all in capital letters. The poor fella is literally screaming at his radio and sending capital letter texts or tweets into this, because now that mirror that you've spent years avoid, you're staring right into it, and you're seeing what I've seen all along, and you cannot. You're not ready to forgive yourself yet, so you're going to reach out, you're going to lash out in anger at all of the people who told you exactly what he was like. The straw that broke the camel's back was the promotion of a sex pest, and then lies about knowing he was a sex pest before the promotion. The straws that didn't break the camel's back, the parties, I'm doing it, I'm tooting my horn, I don't want to do my solo, I don't want to do my jazz solo, I want to save it for you, I want you to list the greatest hits. Because once I start, I'm not going to be able to stop. It's incredible. And little Kevin Skinner there, his capital letter tweet says, "Stop it, leave it, you're so boring." It's not my fault, mate. It's not my fault that you gave all your money to a scammer on the internet. It's not my fault that you bought that box from the bloke in the van who told you it contained top-of-the-range speakers, and when you got home it was full of bricks. It's not my fault you replied to that text message saying that they'd failed to deliver a parcel to your house, and it turned out they'd emptied your current account. It's not my fault, mate. It's yours. It's yours now. The content for the con men, compassion for the conned, I think has reached its expiry date. If you're still signing up to this, if you're still swallowing it, if you're still buying it, if you're still doffing your cap and tugging your forelock and saying you got all the big calls right and muttering some bilge about Brexit and vaccines, it's on you now. Because he's gone. It's over. He's finished. And all that's left is you. Potless. Clueless. Victim. And still pretending that he's on your side. I genuinely, and I know you're not going to want to hear this, I feel so sorry for you. I truly do. But I did my best. Let's get the phone lines open. What will be your abiding memory of Boris Johnson's prime ministerial career? That's it. That's all I want. And, of course, if you think you've got some positives, then straight to the front of the queue. 0345 6060 973. You can do the detail, the individual event, the memory, the episode, or you can do the broader analysis, what he's done to democracy, what he's done to your faith in politics, what he's done to parliamentary sovereignty, what he's done to the rule of law, what he's done to the relationship between truth and reality, all of that. But you need to ring in. And you do so by dialing 0345 6060 973. Just one final word. on the screaming capital letter texts and tweets, I don't enjoy your tears. They upset me. They sadden me. I don't enjoy your tears. So now do you see that bit of the con? Persuading you that a victory was the discomfort of people who care about the truth? Somehow you score a win when people who care about common decency are frustrated by the election of a man who has none? You think that it's some sort of triumph for you when people who understand what leaving the European Union would mean are reduced to anger and heartbreak at the prospect of doing something so ridiculous while you'd been persuaded it was a good idea, and then you realised it wasn't, and you're just left clutching these pathetic straws of Schadenfreude? Oh, it's awful. My house is on fire, but I love it because the neighbours are going to get their conifers singed. My house is on fire, but I love it because the bloke over the road is crying. You set fire to all our houses. And Boris Johnson, he struck the match. It's 21 minutes after 10. It's the end of the line for Boris Johnson. I mean, I suppose Lord North might give him a run for his money, but probably the worst Prime Minister this country has ever seen. I'd include Neville Chamberlain in that, for the record. But that's just my view. What's yours? What will you most remember him for? And it doesn't have to be your sort of top thing, because we might all agree on that. It's just the thing that, for you, pops into your mind when I ask that question. What will you remember Boris Johnson's prime ministerial career for? 22 minutes after 10 is the time. Alec is in Cardiff. Alec, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. You well?
I'm pretty good, yes. But as I say,
the last time I spoke to you was at the end of Trump's tenureship, so I thought I'd ring back today.
I like this. You're a sort of human bookend.
Yeah, a bit of continuity in that respect.
Carry on.
Yeah, so just a simple one, and as you say, it's not like the top thing, but one that right at the start of the pandemic, when he was given one of his first speeches at the lectern, and he stood up and he's got everyone's attention, and it was like, oh, this looks really serious. This is going to be a really big thing. And he was speaking in a very statesmanship way, and unlike Boris, and it really got the country's attention. It was, oh, this is a really serious issue. And as you said many times, many other journalists have reflected on, and then at the end of it, just went, but I've been shaking everyone's hands at hospital anyway. And it's almost like he just can't help himself. He just can't be serious. He can't do it properly, and thinks, oh, this isn't how I behave. I've got to make a little joke, and just, in doing so, just completely undermined everything he did. He got everyone's attention. There was, oh, this is really, really important. And then all of a sudden, it's just completely taken the rug away and just completely undone all his good work. Well, in that particular moment, it was just incredible.
And I guess this is probably the last day upon which, unless there is some sort of Nosferatu style rising from the political grave, this is the last day we'll try to unpick what that means or where that could possibly come from. Of all the things you had to do that day,
don't undermine it.
Don't do the polar opposite. Don't boast about having been doing the Why do you think? Do you think it was?
I think it just captures. He just not fit for the job and only ever cares about doing it.
Yeah, but even if that were true, what comes into his head at that point? Is it I don't really mean what I've just been saying, and because I'm so petulant and so childish, I'm going to throw something in that shows everyone I don't really mean what I've just been saying? Or
I think it just summarizes his whole character and demeanour, the way he's always operated. Just doesn't take it very seriously and just in it for a laugh.
Shaking hands with COVID patients.
Yeah. Why would you say that? Why would you do that?
I don't know. Why would you say that? It's incredible, isn't it?
It doesn't. There's no logic to it, and I can imagine all his advisors just going crazy in the background. And why did you do that? And it's just, I mean, I forget if Tam was there at the time. Imagine what he was thinking about it. All the scientists, because there was that very early, obvious contrast between the scientists and the politicians, and obviously they advise and they make rules and what have you. And
they do science.
Yeah, and then it just completely showed the chasm between the two of them, and very early on, it's just, it's ridiculous.
No, I like it. The shaking hands, it does seem strangely sort of emblematic almost of a broader malaise. We should dig out that letter as well, shouldn't we, just to remind ourselves of the clues that were there. I'm not a believer, oddly, that people can't change. I think that people can change, but it's very hard, and you have to do a lot of work to stop being the person that you turned yourself into to survive public school in the case of Boris Johnson, and to a lesser extent myself. Audrey is in Folkestone. Audrey, what would you like to say?
Hello, hi. Thank you for letting me talk to you as well.
You're very welcome.
I think my biggest regret of the last 3 years, and I didn't vote for him, is watching the establishment, watching politics, the trust completely gone. It stems from we can't believe the experts anymore.
Yeah.
It stems from Brexit and everything else. And I was just saying to the lady before I came on to you.
That's no lady, that's my producer.
I'm just hoping that we learn from this. I mean, people denied what was happening in the Holocaust after World War II, but Germany accepted the things that were done wrong, and they've put controls in place.
So, I mean, it's a fair. Obviously, I know that you're being hyperbolic, if that's the word. I mean, it's a hefty comparison to draw, and I know you don't mean to draw a direct comparison. You're just talking about the ability to acknowledge wrongdoing. So you chose one of the most wrong things ever to highlight your point. But no one's putting Johnson on the same page as Hitler.
Oh, cool. No. I'm kind of saying that, we have nearly 200,000 people that have died during COVID.
Yes.
We've got all these things going on. We've been told, we've been lied, we've been misled. You watch it, and people still think that he is the best thing since sliced bread.
Where does that come from, do you think? Where does that come from, do you think? Because I don't think people are going to tell me. They're just telling me to stop doing this, stop talking about it, stop describing Boris Johnson's premiership so accurately, stop making me feel so stupid and so craven and so stop it, in capital letters. But where are they? Where do they get off? How does it happen? Even after all this time, as with Trump, people still waving their little flags.
People don't like to admit they're wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. I think it's okay, it's fine. The other one would have been worse, and all this kind of rubbish. Where you need to look at what's going on. We're facing a crisis. We're going to have. My mum worked for social services many, many, many years ago. She was 27, 28 years in social service, an ambulance driver. During the cold snap back in the 80s and 90s, she used to go to old people's homes to collect them to take to centre, and she found them dead in the kitchen where they wouldn't put the heating on. They were dead. And I can see a tunnel opening up in front of us where we're going to have this at the winter, and this is by people that are only concerned about themselves. We need professionals in politics. We need people that are intelligent, are thinking about the country, and I'm thinking about
the national interest, not the self-interest.
And he's destroyed that.
I'm going to agree with you on that. People are welcome to ring in and disagree, but this idea that if politicians are allowed to create their own realities, whether through alternative facts or the dismissal of expertise, then the public think they are as well, right up until the point that they can't afford to eat or they're on an incubator with COVID. You can't choose your own reality. You can't, however much you may want to. None of us can we? And you're on the list. That breakdown in trust, I suspect, is going to be a theme that we return to. It's probably going to be my biggest takeaway. In fact, thank you, Audrey. That's 2 A's so far, Alec and Audrey. Do you think we can get through the whole show in alphabetical order? No? All right, it's just a thought. For me, it's that. Is it Upton Sinclair, that novel? It's ages since I read it. It couldn't happen here. That's the thing for me. It could. I never thought it could happen here. I wouldn't put responsibility for that entirely at Boris Johnson's feet. I think Farage was the sort of the early warning signal that it could happen here, that fascistic politics and the complete mainstreaming of lies and racist rhetoric could actually happen in this country. And the thing that makes me repel that rhetoric is patriotism. And the thing that made me believe it couldn't happen here is love of this country. And that it's awful to have that compromised. I don't love my country any less. I just see it a lot more clearly. And it could happen here. It could happen in America. Johnson prepared to ride roughshod over judges, select committees, his own colleagues, to actually chuck people who disagree with him but were right, to chuck them out of the party. I again, as with the Trump comparisons, I fight shy of using the F word too much. But what do you call a politician who tries to traduce the judiciary, who tries to undermine the rule of law, who expels dissenting colleagues from the party of government? What is a word you use to describe that mode of power abuse? I'll give you a clue. It begins with F. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines. 33 minutes after 10. Kim in Hampshire with a rare positive, she says. Well, maybe a positive, but sadly not for the best reason. Boris Johnson's premiership has made me more engaged in politics. I'm in my 20s, and this made me realise that people my age need to be informed and involved in politics, to pay attention and vote with a fully informed view of what we vote for, especially after watching my family fall for his lies. Speaking of families, that story about Liz Truss I referred to earlier is I find it very poignant. I think Liz Truss is going to be a disastrous Prime Minister. I think that's obvious to, well, pretty much everybody, actually, including most of her own colleagues in the House of Commons, who, of course, didn't want her. But the rise of Liz Truss has apparently left her father so upset he can barely speak about it. If we don't stay with this topic of what you're going to remember about Boris Johnson's premiership for the whole 3 hours, we'll probably move on to that, because it's an evolution from yesterday's conversation about friendships and political beliefs, political convictions. But the idea of families being fractured, which we just sort of flirted with yesterday, is in many ways even more poignant than friendships being fractured by politics. And of course, we came to a great understanding on yesterday's programme of why this is happening. It's because to support the excesses of a Trump or a Johnson, or even, of course, a Farage, is to reach a place politically that you can't sustain a friendship with. It's not about Brexit necessarily, because that could have been many different things, but it's about breaking point posters and Rwandan deportations and dinghy demonisations. It's about dehumanisation, Muslim bans, for example. And if you've got people you thought were your friends who are into that kind of thing, which is still very much on the rise, then I understand how friendships can fail. But what happens in the context of a family? We may get onto that a little later in the programme, because if it's happening in the next Prime Minister's own family, you've got to imagine it's happening in millions of others. Rachel is in Bristol. Rachel, what are you going to take away from this curious period of British politics?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Lovely to speak to you.
Likewise.
I think trust, again, is a big one. But for me, I've never really trusted Tories. I've always been quite left, quite liberal. But
Sure.
it's the trust in our, institutions, those checks and balances that come in. You know, he paroled Parliament, nothing happened. The Owen Paterson, there was a bit of pushback on.
I think that was the beginning of the end, actually, because I can probably muster up a defence of our checks and balances from the fact that he did finally get found out. He did finally get slung out, but it would take me quite some effort.
That was on a very minor thing from me.
Yes,
well,
it
not
was.
minor, but
No, in constitutionally
broken the
speaking,
law, yeah,
you could say
he's
it
been
was
proven
minor.
to break the law, and he stayed in power. And I didn't understand. That broke my brain. I didn't understand how that was allowed to happen. And every little thing, it just chips away.
And you think
until-
you see reports that Liz Truss may not even have an ethics advisor, and you realise that the damage doesn't go away with him, does it? Because he's kind of
Exactly.
pushed the envelope so far. Kwasi Kwarteng, someone in the House of Commons has removed all reference to Kwasi Kwarteng's role in the Owen Paterson scandal and cover, or attempted exoneration of Owen Paterson. That's been removed from his Wikipedia page by someone in the House of Commons. That, of course, is part of the legacy. He's likely to be the next Chancellor of the Exchequer. So the Prime Minister might do away entirely with the ethics advisor, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer or someone is rewriting his Wikipedia page to remove all reference to his role in one of the defining scandals of Boris Johnson's premiership. It's not going to go away with him, is it?
Exactly, and the more they push it, the more they think they can push it, and they'll just nudge forward until it's just, I don't know where it ends, really.
No, well,
And,
we do know where it ends. We just hope that we don't get there. We hope that there are interventions before we do. And your pessimism about checks and balances is built, I think, on the knowledge that what actually did for him in the end was the self-interest of Conservative politicians who'd begun to think that they were more likely to keep their seats if someone else was in charge, rather than any sudden discovery of a moral compass or an integrity alarm.
And I mean, he stacked the government, obviously, with people that were always going to be at his beck and call, always going to be behind him. So there didn't seem to be anyone left to call out and shout before that.
Which is why
until they realised they were all heading,
for the door. The three Ps I've got from you then: the proroguing, the Paterson, and the parties.
Yeah. I think the three Ps is a very neat way to put it.
And there they are. And again, people, it doesn't matter. Oh, no big deal. Keir Starmer had a curry. Or so. The Daily Mail's gone absolutely bonkers now with this attempts to undermine the Standards Committee. Quite incredible. The committee, when the inquiry was convened, had a majority of Conservative MPs on it. It was chaired by Chris Bryant, who immediately recused himself and said, look, and in order, this is the thing with trying to do the right thing, if you like, because the Daily Mail don't care. The chair of the committee says, look, I've been too outspoken on Boris Johnson's law-breaking and lies, so obviously I'm going to step down because it's the right thing to do. So he does the right thing, and yet, of course, they're still queuing up to attack the committee, even after Chris Bryant does the right thing, because that's what happens when the F word is on the table. The idea that you can have a traditional toing and froing of politics when you've got the Daily Mail essentially punting absolutely baseless propaganda, it goes out the window. 2 weeks of front pages about Keir Starmer's curry, knowing that it was all a load of an inverted pyramid of piffle, if you like, but desperate to try to create some sort of false equivalence. Even the BBC starts reporting it after day 4 or day 5. The police get involved after day 6 and say they're going to have, incredible scenes of manipulation of the political discourse by a media baron. In this case, probably not the owner, but his representative on earth, Paul Dacre, who is now so desperate for a peerage and a seat in the House of Lords that they're trying to undermine the inquiry into Boris Johnson's lies to the House of Commons for fear that if he does get recalled by his constituents in Uxbridge, it might somehow scupper the resignation honours list that he expects to be on. 10:40 is the time. I mention all of that because the damage done, it's like a cancer at the heart of our constitution, at the heart of our democracy, and getting rid of one enormous boil, one enormous tumour will not, as anyone who's been through these nightmares know, will not get rid of the cancer. Alex is in Acton. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Very much following on from that point. I think the most notable thing about this whole farce is the size of his majority that he got at the general election. The people that have never voted Tory before in their lives broke cover to vote for this guy. Yes. And you could see him coming from a mile off. He got fired for making up quotes. You could see, how out to the degree to which he stood by the first of his children. You could see him coming, and yet people still decided this was the moment to change the habit of a lifetime. And the thing that's really terrifying about that is the precedent it sets for the Tory party. Because if this shows the Tory party that's how you win seats that you've never won before, what happens next? And the same thing's happening in the States with the Republicans. And it's funny that at the moment, I think it's quite easy, especially with him leaving and him trying to inflate his own legacy. It's easy to go for the scapegoating. I think your point about the tumour is exactly right. The really terrifying implication is what this says about us as a democracy, and what it says about democracy in an age where people can coalesce around the craziest ideas on social media. They can make themselves believe anything. Where do we go from here?
So your phone line is dodgy, but the quality of your call is exceptional, and it tallies with a lot of the stuff that Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Prize-winning Filipino journalist, has written about in her new book. I saw her again last night. I interviewed her earlier this week, and almost word for word warning about that. That phrase there, coalescing around the craziest stuff on social media, is a large part of it. And also, as you've alluded to, the lessons that opportunistic politicians will learn. I think Liz Truss I genuinely believe that Liz Truss has sat there with a notebook, almost astonished at what Boris Johnson has got away with in the context of truth versus untruth, in the context of reality versus lies. And she has thought, wow, look what I'm reminded, I've said this before, of that Ricky Gervais film, The Invention of Lying. It's as if Johnson was the first person in the world to discover, Johnson and Trump, in a Western democracy, that you really can lie on a scale that is beyond the belief of ordinary people. And Liz Truss has sat there like a sorcerer's apprentice. And now she's rolling out her own versions of it with still on her face a look of, I can't believe I'm getting away with this. And they cheer, comparing the BBC to one of these ludicrous new TV channels unfavourably, saying at least we get facts here. And the audience cheer. Boris Johnson saying the media got rid of him. She knows it's not true. She even apologises at the end of the interview to the journalist on the stage with her, but she can't quite believe people are cheering it. That's scary.
Exactly. I mean, your point about the Philippines is right. I mean, Marquez, if I remember rightly, he's a convicted criminal. This seems to be like more of a global phenomenon. It seems to be a breakdown of democracy on a much, much bigger scale. And it does beg the question, what next? I think Truss is arguably relatively innocuous compared to what's potentially coming down the line.
Maybe. And you say that. And in fact, one of the people that wrote, thank you, Alex, I did a broader step back analysis there. It doesn't have to be individual instances, but that broader lesson, the size of the majority and the enthusiasm, the passion of the support still out there. You see it a lot on social media. People who have given up any semblance of caring about truth or reality. and are just, never mind the quality, feel the strength of my passion. But that talk about voters who voted Tory for the first time ever is actually echoed today by some words from Rachel Wolfe, one of the co-authors of the manifesto that Johnson was elected on in 1929. And she says, neither the candidates nor the party seem to understand the new Tory voter coalition, and we should be worried about a move toward extreme populist politics if the promises of the manifesto aren't delivered. It's incredibly destructive, it's morally wrong, but also it makes it much more likely that these people are going to be susceptible to really populist politics. A bit pot kettle for my money. I think the populist politics is already out of the bag and running around the room, largely as a consequence of that 2019 election. But when Alex says we should be worried about what comes next, and one of the people that wrote Boris Johnson's manifesto in 2019 completely concurs, then you would have to be crackers not to pay attention. One of the authors of so you think, there's a bloke on the radio with O'Brien slagging off Boris Johnson. One of the authors of the 2019 manifesto takes up exactly the same warning as Alex, saying that if these two candidates continue to be completely tin-eared to the concerns of the people that voted for them in 2019, then who knows what's going to happen next. 10:45 is the time. 2 phone lines free if you want to grab one for yourself on 0345 6060 973. 10:48 is the time. And honestly, if you think these clowns don't know what Kafkaesque means, wait until you hear them use the phrase witch hunt. It's incredible. Witch hunt is, I presume, a figure of speech because there aren't any witches. So therefore, a witch hunt is, by definition, a bogus and pointless exercise. There is no such thing as a witch, ergo a witch hunt is futile, meaningless, designed to demonise innocent people. An investigation into a Prime Minister who has apologised for misleading the House of Commons over the nature of his misleading of the House of Commons is by definition the polar opposite of a witch hunt. It's an investigation into the misleading of the House of Commons by a man who has admitted that he misled the House of Commons. So if you want to use your witch hunt analogy, you'd have to find a real witch. But of course, there is no such thing as a real witch. And don't make any misogynistic jokes about the next Prime Minister. Actually, seriously, don't. Sometimes I get a bit distracted by my inbox. So there it is. Kafkaesque. It's the actual polar opposite of Kafkaesque, because Kafkaesque generally means a man being broken on the wheel of oppressive government or a malign, malevolent state. Boris Johnson is being held to account for his own actions by his own colleagues. It's the polar opposite of Kafkaesque. But compared to the misuse of the phrase witch hunt by these idiots, it's almost accurate to call it Kafkaesque. It's a witch hunt. What's the investigation about? We're looking at the nature of Boris Johnson misleading the House of Commons. But he did. Well, how do you know he did? You biased lefty. Because he apologised for it. Oh, right. So we need to look at whether he did it deliberately or not. Not really. I mean, the nature of misleading is changed slightly in this context, isn't it? If he said there weren't any parties, but he was actually at one of them, it's not really tenable that he accidentally misled the House of Commons, unless you're seriously going to argue that he attended a party without knowing it was a party. Spoiler alert, he's already tried that. Let's just pick this apart, actually, because sometimes the Daily Mail, it gets into the bloodstream, even of otherwise sensible journalists and commentators. This is not a story. This is absolute hogwash. Whatever Panic comes out with later in a ludicrous intervention designed to just muddy the waters, the investigation, the inquiry by the Standards Committee is a consequence of Boris Johnson misleading the House of Commons. It is a necessary check and balance upon the precedent set by a Prime Minister, or indeed any minister, standing up in the House of Commons and saying something that is untrue. Now, traditionally, there is a distinction to be drawn between saying something that you didn't realise was untrue when you said it, which I think Amber Rudd resigned over, didn't she? Didn't Amber Rudd resign because she said something untrue without knowing it was untrue? She'd been given some duff information by her office. God, that feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it, when a senior front-bench politician would resign for accidentally misleading the House, or it's been done deliberately. Johnson's defence can only be that he did it accidentally. But how can that be an even vaguely meaningful defence when the thing you misled the House of Commons about was a thing you did yourself? So when he said, all rules have been abided by at all times, okay, that's fine. He honestly thought all rules had been abided by at all times, and he didn't realise that his colleagues were having parties. Could just about get away with that up to the point when it emerged he was at lots of parties himself, only one of which, bizarrely, has resulted in a fine for law breaking. So to claim that I didn't realise there were parties, despite having been at them, is impossible to frame as accidental. It is literally impossible unless, and I can't believe this is happening in my country, unless the most senior politician in the land is truly going to claim that he attended a party without realising he was attending a party. He thought it was something else. He didn't know it was a party. There's a bloody great cake there, but he didn't know it was a party. And that's the point that we're at now. With the full connivance of Paul Dacre and the Daily Mail, Boris Johnson's defence is that he only accidentally misled the House of Commons when he claimed there hadn't been any parties, because even though he actually attended parties himself, the party he attended, or the parties he attended, he didn't realise were actually parties. And the client media going along with it, the people pretending that there's something here, even the BBC reporting it this morning because the Daily Mail's front page exercises far too much influence over the news agenda of the rest of the country. Otherwise, they wouldn't have spent 2 weeks sticking the nonsense about Keir Starmer's curry there. Is now being dedicated to trying to undermine this inquiry, this investigation into a lying Prime Minister, because a former editor of the Daily Mail's peerage might be on the line. And also because of that reason that an earlier caller touched on why people are still tugging their forelock and doffing their caps and worshipping at the altar of Boris Johnson, because they can't admit that they're wrong. The more curdled your soul is, the more powerful you are, the more arrogant you are, the more convinced of your own brilliance you are, the more impossible it becomes to admit that you've bet the house on an absolute lemon. And so the truth, the reality of Boris Johnson, the more it emerges, the more people like Paul Dacre have to pretend the opposite, as with Trump. You have to keep insisting. You have to double, triple, quadruple down on the lies. And you end up like Rudy Giuliani or Paul Dacre, who I think are probably quite similar characters, peddling absolute bilge in order to avoid the admission that you have made a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake, and you have inflicted upon a country you profess to love the disaster of Brexit and the absolute aberration of Boris Johnson. Lucy's in Oxford. Lucy, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your show, because you managed to articulate and mirror my feelings, but just managed to say them. You keep me sane through all of this.
Well, you keep me sane as well. So it's mutual. Thank you, Lucy.
So I was listening to your show earlier. Well, we've been listening all day, and you talked to somebody about you could not understand why Boris Johnson was so proud at shaking hands with somebody that had COVID.
Yes.
And I remember actually watching it on telly and thinking, he is trying to gain the popularity that Princess Diana gained when she shook hands with an AIDS patient. It just came to me straight away. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I saw. He wants to be popular. He was trying to gain the popularity that Princess Diana did by being brave enough to shake hands with an AIDS patient.
So then that tallies with him not really wanting to do the heavy stuff, the serious stuff. Telling people things they don't want to hear is anathema to him.
Well,
and he just had to tell people things they didn't want to hear. So in order to claw back some sort of narcissistic brownie points, he then had to try and cast himself as a latter-day Princess Diana by pretending that he was doing something comparable to what she did with HIV.
Yeah, he was being brave. He was just the showman that he always is, isn't he? He will have, there will have been his followers that would have been really pleased or proud of him for doing that. But,
good old Boris, shaking hands with people. He's so brave, or whatever you want to call it.
What was it he said? You'd be pleased to hear.
Yes.
I even shook hands.
It's an excellent impression, Lucy. Are you a professional? Do you have any tickets you'd like help selling?
No, just nervous.
Don't be. I think you're right. And that would be the narcissism. That in fact hadn't occurred to me before. The bit about not hating telling people things they don't want to hear. That's not what I came into politics for. I came into politics for cake and biscuits and cheers and applause. I don't want to be the bloke that's got to stand up in front of the whole country and tell them things they really don't want to hear. As Connor's reminded me in a tweet, that it was around that time he started talking about our inalienable right to go to the pub. a pathetic attempt to curry favour, to sort of, as Connor says, rather than leading with maturity and responsibility. Cometh the hour, findeth the fridge. No one's mentioned the fridge yet. We've got the shaking hands. I'm surprised that's played such a big role, but I can see why. The trust, the expertise, the denigration of not just authority and expertise, but also of reality itself, which is a huge echo of America and Kellyanne Conway and Donald Trump. And then the size of his majority, that or the scale of his success up until the point of his failure, being a really alarming illustration that it's Sinclair Lewis. I think I said Upton Sinclair earlier. Thank you for the reminder. That it could happen here. The worst things could happen here. Things that we thought were somehow inconceivable for Princess Bride fans. Inconceivable could actually happen here. Sue's in Herne Bay. Sue, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Sue.
For me, it's the Priti Patel thing. The fact
Which
that,
one? Which one? The Rwanda bit or the bullying?
The writing of a ministerial... the breaking of the ministerial code over bullying,
right.
Having a report written about it, Boris allegedly trying to interfere and getting the report toned down, and then in the end the advisor who wrote the report being
I don't think you need an allegedly there, actually.
Well, yeah.
They spent £370,000 settling that bullying claim by a top civil servant. That doesn't get reported very often.
No,
he quit amid allegations of Priti Patel's bullying. There was an investigation into the bullying, which was found that she was a bully, and Boris Johnson just ignored it, prompting the independent ethics advisor, I think his name was Alex Allen, to resign. Yeah, you're on the list with that one.
He didn't just ignore it. What he did was he sent out his WhatsApp message about telling them to form a square around the Pritzker.
Oh, you're good.
That's what made me cringe more than anything.
This is what I mean.
Out of the school corridors kind of language.
Yes, this is what I mean about being in a jazz band. You're doing a drum solo. You're doing a drum solo now in my jazz band because you just remembered something and you've gone off on a tangent. You've got the quotes there. Form a square around the Pritzker.
Yeah, it's just cringeworthy, isn't it?
Yeah. Completely.
It's Bullingdon Club, it's the school corridors of Eton, and Liz Truss is doing the same with her, name-calling and her playing to the crowd with, she's like some sixth form prefect who's, got all the little ones listening to her.
It is, and she's learned. I honestly think she sat there with a notebook going, oh my God, everyone knows that's a lie, but they're clapping. Yep. I'm going to try one of those.
Yep.
And that's really what's happened at these interminable, insufferable hustings. Every single one of them. I'm going to try one of those live. One of those. Anything Johnson can do, I can do better.
Yep. And of course, she'll probably keep Priti Patel in post.
I'm hearing not.
With the Rwandan thing, of course, that it's disgusting, and Priti Patel should be long gone. She should have been sacked, and she's been sacked before, and yet here she is. She's back, and she's in charge. Smugly and with that evil look on her face.
None of us can help. None of us can help the way our faces look. None of us can help the way our faces look, Sue.
Well,
I mean, I occasionally get photographed from unflattering angles myself. I don't think it is necessarily cause for condemnation. Thank you, Sue. Great memory there for that former square around the Pritzker. That's what I meant at 10 o'clock this morning when I said I can't make a list. Well, I can make a list, but I'll miss stuff off it. She's right as well, isn't she? We used to get on our high horse about that. He's done what? Well, he has an independent advisor on ministerial standards who's investigated allegations that Priti Patel was a bully. You can be fairly clear about the veracity of those allegations from the fact that they've paid £370,000 to the civil servant that made them. £370,000. So what did the investigation find? Well, it found she was a bully. Oh, well, she'll be out then. No, not in Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. She'll probably get a promotion. It is 4 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think we're going to move it along a little, not yet, because I'm still making the list. Isn't that a song? Making a list. I'm checking it twice. And then when we've made a list, we may, because this is it now, it's game over for Boris Johnson with that terrible, diabolical voice in the back of your brain saying, don't you be so sure of that, Sonny. Yeah, I'll be back. It's gone from Santa Claus to Hamilton. Oh, the musical references on this programme are off the scale, aren't they? What's the actual worst thing he's done? Because, Jane there reminding us of the Priti Patel bullying scandal. An earlier caller reminding us of Owen Paterson, the 3 Ps, Paterson proroguing parties. The actual worst thing he's done, they're boasting about shaking hands with COVID victims at a time when the country really needed clarity, leadership, and a cold, hard dose of please be careful. And he's boasting about doing the polar opposite of being careful. What is the actual work? I mean, that's very, very interesting, isn't it? That's not quite the word I want. That's why I paused. It's very symbolic, the fact that it's hard to think of the worst thing. Because we're going to have a list here of 10, possibly 20 things that may well have ended other political careers, ended other prime ministerial periods. But he's presided over, he's committed so many that we could actually have an argument about what was the worst thing he did. Sending J-Dog to Balmoral to mislead the Queen, unlawfully proroguing Parliament. Debbie Abrahams, the Labour MP for Oldham East, tweets to say it's his lies and thinking that laws and rules didn't apply to him, even when a High Court judgment said otherwise. There's so much to choose from and so much we've forgotten. We haven't even mentioned the words Chris Pincher yet. We've referred to him. But promoting a sex pest and then lying about whether or not you knew he was a sex pest was what finally signalled the defenestration. But that wasn't the be-all and end-all of the reasoning behind it. Many much worse offences had been committed before that. Amazing, really. 6 minutes after 11. And then you've got the stuff that isn't actually objectively scandalous, but which is emblematic of a dismal decline in our democracy. For example, putting someone like Nadine Dorries, who routinely uses the privilege of Parliament to libel Britain's best-loved broadcaster and many others, whose grasp of her brief is so objectively ridiculous that she ends up saying things in public that are untrue. And everyone in the room has pointed out that it's untrue before she's even got to the end of the sentence, not knowing how Channel 4 is funded, for example. Putting someone like that in the department, at the top of the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. That's incredible when you think about it. In many ways, it's more emblematic of the broader malaise than some of the actual scandals or instances of law breaking. The fact that he has such contempt for the people, for the cabinet, for culture, for media, for sport, that he'd put Nadine Dorries in charge of it. That's incredible, isn't it? It's like putting Mr. Blobby in the Ministry of Defence. Actually, he kind of did, didn't he, when he put... Was it him or Theresa May that put Gavin Williamson in? I think it was Theresa May, actually. Give him a break. 11:07 is the time. I've got 2 or 3 phone lines free. 2 now. It's just been grabbed. So we continue, but the stuff that you think of, it can be a bit more left field. It doesn't have to be the headline stuff. It doesn't have to be the massive stuff. The stuff that you look back, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, the thing I really couldn't believe he did was what? 0345 6060 973. Howard's in Aylesbury. Howard, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
James, before I get to my point, don't fall off your chair. I've got a humorous part for you.
I'll be the judge of that.
I started a new job this week.
Right.
I'm a 30-year firefighter. I've just retired after winning my McLeod and winning my pension back.
Yes.
And I started a little job this week. I walked into Wembley Arena on Tuesday night to be confronted with a sign, Rishi Sunak, and I realised I was at the hustings.
Oh, no.
6,000 of the people I hold in the lowest esteem in my life, and that was the first night of a new job.
And you had no idea what the gig was going to be. You thought you were going to... It might have been a nice sort of Pet Shop Boys concert or something like that.
Well,
and
the thing was, I'd listened all day, listening to the news, knowing the hustings was on, but never actually got to where it was being held. The only positive is...
Yes.
The LBC hoodie.
Did you get one?
Go on site. I tried. I wasn't allowed one.
I'll get you
but
one.
You got to get them on your site.
I'll get you one. So now, mate, 30 years in the fire service, was it?
Yeah.
I'll get you one. All right, yeah. Keith, hang on. I need to speak to my colleagues. Can we make sure Howard gets an LBC hoodie? All right, a large LBC hoodie, because he deserves it after the shock he got when he opened the door of the Wembley Arena on Tuesday night and saw that lot gathered there with their flags and their forelocks.
And the irony was I had an FBU T-shirt to wear under my uniform.
Oh, sensational. Sensational. Well, as a firefighter, I probably don't need to be Nostradamus to know what direction this conversation is about to go in.
All I'm going to go with is, do you remember the other week you had a gentleman caller on who mentioned the scab that's been removed off your arm?
Yes.
And the infection just rises to the top. As I said to your researcher, they will hold Johnson in the same way as they do Thatcher. When they want a cheer, they will mention Johnson. This will be the newest one, because as witnessed the other night, his name gets mentioned, the hall becomes rapturous, applause, everything.
I heard this from one of my colleagues. It's incredible, right? If he was on the ballot, he'd still win. He'd beat both of them.
I think so. The 6,000 in that room, I say every time, it didn't matter if you had a Truss sign in your hand or a Sunak sign in your hand, when he was mentioned, clapping, waving of banners, everything.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't get it. We're in prom season at the minute.
Yes.
And they're debating whether you sing Land of Hope and Glory. Well, we shouldn't, because there's no hope. And definitely on the world scene, there's no glory to being in the UK at the moment.
What will you take away from the premiership, do you think? When I say to you complete this sentence, God, when that Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, I couldn't believe that he actually...
I'll give you this one. Before the election, there was a lady on the telly, a hairdresser in Wales. She was questioned about Boris Johnson, and her answer was, we know he lies, but he's our liar. Blimey. And from that moment, when I heard that, I thought that's where we're at. That's our demise of our country, because that's what people are relying on now. And the best thing that's happened is he has gone, but only to be replaced with more infection.
Well, that's the problem. And I really do think we're going to be returning again and again to this observation that Liz Truss seems to have been taking notes about that kind of phenomenon that you describe. We know he's a liar, but he's our liar. Couple that with calls what I've taken from people saying things like, I know he lies, but I love it because it upsets people like you. And that's when you get to this really ugly division in politics, very deliberately stoked. You know, this is what wedge issues do. This is why they hire people like Linton Crosby to come into Downing Street and advise on how you can distract from the stuff that matters by inflating the stuff that doesn't. Culture wars, statues, Black Lives Matter protests, kneeling footballers, all of this stuff. While the pound goes off a cliff, the country prepares to have the worst of all energy bills crises, and cost of living is about to go off the scale. But hey-ho, you get cross about gender-neutral toilets or speed limits. Or smart motorway. I don't know. It's incredible. Howard, did you hand in your resignation? I don't think there's going to be any more hustings. It's going to be back to pop concerts and snooker or whatever it is.
It's Paw Patrol on Saturday, so maybe Boris will be there after Peppa Pig. You never know, do you?
Paw Patrol. I know what I'd rather go to. 13 minutes after 11. Jeanette is in Lyme Regis. Jeanette, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Well, I think that, it's so difficult to know where to start, isn't it? But yes. I think potentially one of the biggest scandals this country will ever see, if it's ever properly investigated, will be Johnson's relationship with Lebedev.
Oh, wow. Yes, which only sort of seemed to come out by accident, didn't it?
But he was so shameless at the select committee. He just said, yes, I think I did. And it was like he didn't see that as an issue, and I do wonder what we don't know yet.
Well, the idea that, we always describe Alexander Lebedev as a former KGB spy, although one thinks of Vladimir Putin's words that there's no such thing as a former KGB spy. He is currently sanctioned in Canada for being, and I think I quote, a key member of Vladimir Putin's inner circle, end quote. Yeah. And the serving British Foreign Secretary, having jettisoned his entourage without any security or advisors, turns up at a palazzo in Italy for a knees up, parties that are reportedly bacchanalian, and is photographed the next day looking as if he's been dragged through several hedges backwards, and was the guest of the, quotes, former, end quotes, KGB spy Alexander Lebedev, and only really coughed to it several years later.
Yeah.
You're on the list. The Lebedevs. I mean, it's the second hour of the programme, and the list it's growing every 10 seconds because there's stuff that no one's mentioned yet, like Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and the Jimmy Savile slur in the House of Commons, that disgusting attempt to use the worst of racist social media lies to actually bring them into the House of Commons, like that ridiculous Guido Fawkes character, as if he is a sort of person of repute. Incredible, really, to reflect upon what's happened. But you're Lebedev, absolutely on the list. And again, that's something else that we can't. Why are we investigating that? It happened years ago. Why are we investigating a prime minister who misled the House of Commons? Oh, it happened years ago. This legal advice that Panic is due to give in about 45 minutes. The Daily Mail summarises it into 6 points. To my untrained mind, none of them are legal. Reasons why we shouldn't have an inquiry into Boris Johnson misleading Parliament. There's already been a Scotland Yard inquiry into the parties. Just pause for a minute. That's how bonkers things have become. I'm trying not to use that word. I apologise. Anyway, thank you, Jeanette. You're on the list. Lebedev, Savile, Patel. Whew. Trust, handshaking. I think we're going to have to carry on for a bit longer before we start going for what's the actual worst thing. It's 11:16. 18 minutes after 11 is the time. Don't forget lying in front of the bulldozers. Yes, he did say that he would lie in front of the bulldozers before he could countenance another runway being built at Heathrow in his own constituency. And then, of course, when the bulldozers moved in to start work on the Heathrow runway, he said he would never let happen. He flew out of the country on a concocted Foreign Secretary business. You're right, Ben. I've put that on the list as well, the bulldozers. I mean, no one's going to put that down as the worst thing he's done, but we're not doing that yet. We're just making a list. I'm checking it twice. Simon's in Tulse Hill. Simon, what do you reckon?
Morning, James. Yeah, I am going to talk about that question of what's the worst thing he's done.
Go on.
I think it's the kind of legacy, the culmination of all these things. The sort of the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. And it's for me, it's that you can actually conduct yourself as a politician like that and still continue to be successful.
Yes. Not just successful, popular.
Popular,
you think back to that description of the hall at Wembley Arena on Tuesday night from our last caller, and the idea that people are still cheering him despite this almost endless list of appalling behaviours.
Yeah, and that is a new thing. That wasn't the case before Boris Johnson, and I think that's the worst thing really that has come out of his premiership. But in terms of a single action, I would also say the Owen Paterson scandal was absolutely disgraceful. To try and defend somebody that did what he did speaks of a culture that in government that is just unthinkable. That you would not just outright denounce someone who had participated in that sort of behaviour to try and actually change the rules for them, to try and get them protected.
You get busted for breaking the rules, and then you try to retrospectively change the rules to get him off the hook. And look what's happening today in the Daily Mail. They're pretty clear. It's pretty clear that he's going to be busted for breaking the rules. So they're trying to call off the entire investigation. They're trying to do that. It's like a reverse Patterson. Well, let's actually nip this one in the bud before the verdict even drops, because we didn't get away with it with Patterson because we only tried to erase the verdict after it had dropped.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just realised that. Well spotted.
But with Patterson specifically, that type of action that he engaged with, taking money under the table, not declaring it to lobby
that wasn't under
government.
the. Be a bit careful. He was found to have taken money and lobbied on behalf of people he was supposedly consulting for. I think that under the table's a phrase that worries me slightly. Maybe unduly, but it's me that gets sued, not you. So we'll scratch that.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we knew he was getting money, but we didn't know he was lobbying. That I think was the.
Okay, that's the accurate way of saying it.
I think so.
It sounds dodgy, and then to protect that type of person and not denounce it, and not feel that there is a problem with doing that. It just speaks of a moral sort of compass and a culture within that government that seems very scary and very dubious. I think Liz Truss is a example of this legacy that I'm talking about. This kind of culmination of what he's done is bigger than the sum of all his parts. The fact that she is able to do the stuff she's doing, I think, is a pure product of his premiership.
No, I do too. And actually, I mean, you can't really have legacy as the worst thing he's done, but you can definitely have the Owen Paterson thing, because, again, the F word is haunting my thoughts when you speak, because the idea that the rules and the laws don't apply to us and our cronies is fascistic. That idea that the rules and the laws are for the little people is another little hallmark of fascism, which is not a word, I think, that fits the bill completely, but some of the behaviours, some of these things, our man shouldn't have to abide by the rules. Even after he's been found guilty, we should try and get him off. And they had a big meeting at the Garrick Club. I don't know if you know this. It was a bunch of Daily Telegraph former columnists and editors. They didn't invite Max Hastings, a former editor, because he's one of the few from that crew who can see the idiocy of Brexit and who's been quite outspoken about how awful Boris Johnson is. So it wasn't even politicians, it was columnists sitting there, columnists and journalists, all in the sort of Conrad Black, Barclay Brothers stable, sitting there discussing, Operation Save Owen Paterson.
Oof.
It's horrible.
That hits me in the guts.
Yeah.
It sounds so sort of dirty and sort of underworldish and very, very corrupt. I mean, the corruption. It sounds extremely corrupt, and to think that we've got ourselves into a place where corruption is like debatable. Like people have to have a debate whether that's a bad thing now. It's like, where have we? How have we even got there? Like, that's incredible.
It is, and the reason why we've got there is that I think, well, for me, you tell a massive lie like Brexit, and then somehow the truth is tarnished for generations. As all the truth, because every time the lies are exposed, we're not better off. We haven't taken back control. We haven't changed this. There is a border in the Irish Sea. We can't do that. The need to tell the truth becomes ever harder, and what falls into place behind that is more and more lies. Simon, thank you. The dogs from Afghanistan, says Anne in Leeds. That was a grim tale as well, wasn't it? The full truth of which has never been fully acknowledged or admitted. 11:24 is the time. Thank you for that, Simon. I know a little bit more about that meeting at the Garrick Club for reasons that I can't possibly disclose on air. So if you ever see me in a pub, you want to buy me a pint of neck oil, I'll tell you some of the gossip that I've picked up from that Garrick Club meeting of the Save Owen Paterson Society that will make your hair curl even more than it has already. Kirsty's in Gurrock in Scotland. Kirsty, what would you like to say?
Hello, hi again.
Hello.
Hi, no, I would just like to say that Boris Johnson, one of the worst things I think he's done is the reputation of United Kingdom. I think he lied. That they're prepared to break international law.
That was amazing, wasn't it? That was Brandon Lewis who stood up and said that as a sort of nodding dog to Boris Johnson's backseat car shelf, and to say it.
Yeah, they actually said we will only break it a little bit. And then when Cherry, was it Jan Cherry, the SNP woman who's a lawyer, and she got him for proroguing of Parliament. I thought the people would have woken up by then. I mean, I believe in independence for Scotland, but more so now than ever. I mean, I want to be independent tomorrow, for the very reason is that I just feel the corruption at Westminster is like a banana republic. It's not a republic, it's a monarchy, a banana monarchy. I believe that we're worse than some of these African countries that have had they have whole villages for their wives and all sorts of things, and so corrupt. But I think we're even worse than that.
Well,
you look at a first world country.
He might not have been doling out villages, but you look at some of the people he's put in the House of Lords, whether it's Claire Fox or Zach Goldsmith or Daniel Moylan. Huh?
I know, but you've got spies, you've got Russian mafias and all
steady
sorts
on.
of things.
No, I'm going to pause you there. I don't know. Have you been on the night shift again?
Yes.
I thought I can always tell, Kirsty. Because you're so adrenalised when you come on after a night shift. It worries me slightly. So no, there is no suggestion of mafioso or espionage in the case of people he's actually put in the House of Lords. And I'm quite happy to make that clear. Thank you, Kirsty. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. I take this up to past. I come back after past with my list. And there must be stuff we've missed off it, but we've still got a little bit more to put on it. Margaret's in Greenwich. Margaret, what have you got?
Yes, I heard you mention the North of Ireland, actually. I think the almost trashing of the Good Friday Agreement has been the most egregious thing he's done, because it means civil war in this country again, very likely.
It could do. I mean, does this, and it is his fault, isn't it? Because when the withdrawal agreement hit the Good Friday Agreement, what followed became inevitable, and they all pretended that it didn't. Rees-Mogg was telling everyone that we'd come up with solutions or technological solutions, or it was all a big fuss about nothing. Said it on this show, actually. It was nothing to worry about. Everybody knew it was. Some were too stupid to understand, like Rees-Mogg, but Johnson just did what Johnson always does and ploughed ahead with a lie, thinking it would somehow sort itself out in the wash.
Absolutely, and in fact, he wasn't really a Brexiter until he realised it would get him the top job.
I remember that. Do you remember that morning after when him and Gove were looking at the camera like the biggest rabbits in the biggest headlights? Oh, what the hell have we just done?
Yes.
And we're still only finding out now, aren't we?
We are. Well, I mean, we're finding out big time, and people who've been on holidays this summer haven't had a happy time.
There have been moments.
People have just shot themselves in the foot in so many ways.
How do you account, Margaret, for the people that were cheering at Wembley Arena on Tuesday night at every mention of his name, given that this list is probably never-ending? How have we ended up inhabiting such different realities in this country?
Well, because if to be a member of the Tory party, I think you've got to be a Little Englander. This was
the London members who were a bit more diverse, a bit younger, a little less sort of...
Tories.
Yes, I know.
Tories, James.
Maybe. But there's Tories who find Boris Johnson repellent.
In tooth and claw, if you can be that.
Well, you're not pulling your punches, Margaret, and I'm certainly not going to encourage you to start doing so. It's coming up to 29 minutes after 11. The very cavalier compromising of the Good Friday Agreement, all of them complicit in that. That idea that, the deal that Theresa May got defenestrated for, led by Boris Johnson, that is a sort of semi-coup that he led, was to reject a deal that would have actually protected the Good Friday Agreement. And then along he comes, with the promise, so it's a double header, isn't it, the Northern Ireland point, the promise on the record, on tape, that there would never be a border in the Irish Sea, there'd be no checks, broken immediately by the deal that he signed. That Lord Frost, I didn't mention him on the list of absolute numpties who've been put in the House of Lords. It negotiates a deal, gets a peerage for it, and then spends the rest of his life whining about what an awful deal it is. That's almost, I'm putting that there as well, Frost and the deal. Good God, we're going to be here all day, aren't we? Which is just as well, because it's only half time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time is just approaching 11:30, and Holly Harris is here with your headline. It is 33 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm well onto my second page now on this list of what you will remember Boris Johnson for. We haven't mentioned the pound, probably because these matters are always a little bit complicated for bears of little brain like me, and also because it's very much a developing story. But this morning's newspapers carry the news that the pound fell against the dollar to its lowest level in more than 2 years as worries grew over the state of the UK's economy. I've read elsewhere that the concern about some of Liz Truss's stated economic plans has had a deleterious impact upon our currency's performance. But anyone who listens to the programme on an even vaguely regular basis will know that this is one area where I need someone to hold my hand. Luckily, Katie Martin, the markets editor of the Financial Times, is going to kindly fulfil that role today. Katie, what is happening? Just to start with a nice simple question for you. What is happening and why?
So markets everywhere globally are having an absolute stinker this year. It's been a really horrible year for anyone who's in anything other than oil and the dollar. So sterling is not alone in having had a terrible time. Nonetheless, a pound will now buy you just under $1.15, which is an extremely unusually weak level for the pound. And it's the lowest, as you said, since March 2020, which was when COVID really hit the fan.
trao em. Hoa cười hương sắc tươi xinh, anh đem cả tâm chân tình trao em. Hoa cười hương sắc tươi xinh, anh đem cả tâm chân tình trao em.